Emre Baran is the CEO and co-founder of Cerbos, an authorization management solution helping software companies implement and scale fine-grained access controls. In this discussion, we start with Emre's experience co-founding and operating Turkey's largest social network in the mid-2000s, and work our way to the present as we dig into how Cerbos gives developers a scalable experience for access control that just works.
Emre, welcome to the show. How are things going today?
It's going really well. Thank you very much. Thank you for asking. How are you?
I'm doing well. As we just sort of talked about, I woke up this morning and my 8-year-old was making pancakes. So I got to sit down to a nice hearty breakfast on a Tuesday. So yeah, good, going
Great.
good.
I hope it wasn't too much of a cleanup afterwards. Making is the easy part, cleaning up. Just like code, writing the first piece of code is the easy, making it clean is the hard part.
Yeah, exactly. Operationalizing things. The day two is always the challenge, it seems, with everything.
Yeah.
So your Cerbos is based in the UK, but you don't live in the UK, do you?
I recently moved away from UK, but we are a completely remote company. We have employees from New Zealand to all the way to Seattle, around the world, the long way around the globe, I guess, not through the Pacific. So we are fully remote and fully asynchronous.
Awesome. Good deal. Yeah, I love to hear that. I'm in a similar situation where we have a headquarters in San Jose, but the rest of the company happens to be remote. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's awesome. I love it. So are you I think as far as your start with your tech journey, how did that kind of start? How did you get into technology and, sort of land in this space of really building some awesome startups?
Yeah, I was classically, I guess, initially trained in economics, and I found myself doing a summer internship, 2 summers in a row in an investment bank, and I found myself actually automating my job by writing Excel macros, learning, how to write Excel macros, how to do a couple of things in Excel, record, take a look at the VBA code, figure out what it was doing, and then reverse engineer from there to whatever else I needed to do. Back then, internet was very limited in terms of code and things, availability of things. So, and then after my second year at school, I decided to also study computer science. And ever since, I've been working in software. And throughout my career in so many different companies and so many different environments, I actually found myself writing the authorization logic in the code. And it's always just enough authorization to get by the requirements, but never good enough to be future proof and scalable. And after we conclude with my last company, I was looking for challenges to address, and this is actually one of those things that stood out where, in one of the companies, we had to rewrite our authorization logic and authorization layer 3 times just by the pure virtue of the requirements at the time and us not having to spend too much time on software infrastructure and very much so focusing on customer features. And that moment, when I was looking for all those challenges, authorization stuck out. This is one piece of code that you can spend months or years writing and perfecting, but it's never the core thing for your software, core, value driver. Yet it's a very important one, where no software developer wants to spend too much time on it, but everybody wants to have a very scalable and extensible version of it. So we decided with my co-founders, to very much so focus on providing that as a software infrastructure so that no software developer in the future has to go through that pain of having to build their authorization layer.
Yeah, and it's definitely painful. Everything to do with identity and access management and really keeping things secure It's not an easy task. You have a pretty awesome pedigree of building, sort of a track record of successful startups, and not just launching successful startups, but I think getting the timing right, which is sometimes is equally important, is the right thing at the right time. And I don't know if I ever will talk to anyone ever again that has successfully launched both a social network and an awesome authorization software platform. But can you talk about your experience originally with launching Yonja? Was it?
Correct. So it's of course there's a little bit of a luck involved in this, and how having to come across something and recognizing its potential. But that's one thing, recognizing the potential, and then it's another thing, the world also seeing the way that you see everything. So Yonja was back in 2003, and these were the early days of Friendster and MySpace, where not many people knew. But to all full credit to my brother, he actually saw its exponential growth potential, and said, "This is going to be huge. The world probably needs more than one of these, and let's go build Friendster for Europe." And I was living in the US at the time. He was living in the US. We actually built and launched it with our bunch of our friends in Turkey as our initial group of people. And little did we know at the time it was about, social networks actually grow around the initial group of people you launch them with. But, the timing was right in a sense that the internet was becoming more and more popular. Everybody was doing emails and online presence, etc. What was also becoming popular at the time was uploading photos to the internet, being able to take photos with your digital camera and uploading them, which had an immense effect on social networks growth, because at the time when we were looking at the volume of traffic, about 48 or 46% of all of our traffic was people going and browsing their friends' photos, right? So that kind of led the growth of Yonja. That turned into people finding their old lost friends, high school friends, or finding people who they kind of knew but they didn't, and they one of the things that we provided at the time was being able to show you the graph. How are you related to this person? Who do you know in common? The 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, in effect, and then that turned into a great driver for people dating as well, because nobody wanted to date a complete stranger and everything else. And then we built a business model on top of whatever crossed the line from social network into dating, made those features into premium. And that ultimately led to success of Yonja, which became the most trafficked website in Turkey. It captured about 30-40% of youth in Turkey, and then eventually we exited that to the leading ISP within Turkey. So then, I went to Google. I worked at Google for a while, and one other trend that we saw at Google was two things we saw at Google. One was the growth of e-commerce, AdWords, and analytics, and people wanting to be able to understand their traffic and then be able to actually deliver personalization to that. Because one of the trends that we've seen in AdWords was people were spending more and more money, for clicks, bringing traffic onto their site, but eventually all of that plateaued, and suddenly the conversion rate started plateauing, because all the landing pages, all the e-commerce pages were pretty generic that people came. There was zero application of who you are and why you're there, or how many times you've been there before, and then based on that, giving you a personalized experience. I always looked at this as a similar thing as like a good smart website should be like a very good shopkeeper, right? And who knows how many times you've been there before, which aisles did you look at, what are you on the brink of buying, what have you purchased before, what are you most likely to buy, based on all that experience. And we were trying to digitize that. And that basically coincided with the big data explosion. And at the time, Hadoop was made open source, basically on top of the Google's MapReduce white paper. Hadoop made a lot of this calculations easier. JavaScript was actually also on the up. So we were able to actually build a business at Qubit where we were collecting clickstream data and we were able to store and process all of that data to make sense out of it. And that was, again, a good timing with the market where available technology was possible to adapt to a commercial product that people were wanting. And very similarly with Cerbos, authorization or externalized authorization is not a new concept. Back in 2004 or so, Oracle had a product like this, but it was Oracle. It required you arm and a leg and your firstborn to sign off to be able to get a contract, to be able to try their product. It was slow, relatively slow. It was all Java, etc. And then one thing that we see is, when we look at software's history, there's always been decoupling of core components out to vendors or to additional things where, people building software don't have to build that entire infrastructure. They can take it off the shelf, implement it, and very much so focus on their business layer. Right? We've seen this with databases. We've seen this in security. We've seen this with communication protocols and communication messaging tools. We've seen this with payment tools. Each one of those core things have been decoupled. But when we looked at authorization, that decoupling hasn't been that well. The two reasons. One was performance of this, and the second one was it's very hard to find a nice line between authorization and business logic. And at Cerbos, we did that well. We basically we started with what would the authorization API look like? If we were to just purely implement authorization by API, what is that? And we came up with our check API, which says, can this principal do this action to this resource? And the answer is allow or deny. If a developer actually implements that API, then all of the rule sets can be offloaded to those people who drive the business requirements. And that coincided with Kubernetes uptake, so that actually enabled us to be able to very efficiently build this engine and be able to actually deliver in customers' own environment. So Cerbos, contrary to common, popular choices right now, Cerbos is not a software as a service that runs on the cloud that you can actually access. Software is a binary that we can deliver in so many different ways to run in your own environment, but it runs very efficiently. It runs in your environment. It's very fast and it's very secure and scalable in a sense that as your traffic goes up, it automatically scales up and down. And that basically became, we're riding the wave of what authentication was able to do, because prior to authentication, nobody was thinking about how can we, doing the identity verification on the internet. Authentication, thanks to JWT tokens, etc., popularized that. So we are now taking a bite at the next step of the security chain after authentication, being able to do authorization and as an external entity to your software application. Sorry for the long-winded thing, but it's ultimately 3 careers that actually linked to each other.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, yeah, I mean, I remember back to the social media thing. Like, I remember that was definitely the right timing. So, I remember when I first started doing anything on the internet, it was kind of like blogging at first. And then this whole thing happened, like you were talking about, oh, you can update a picture or upload a picture and then you can have friends. And I remember, like, in my mind at the time, I was like, wow, this is the greatest thing ever. This is amazing. So going past that, so you went to Google straight from Yonja?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
I went to business school in between while I was working at Yonja, but yes.
Okay. And then Qubit, so the way that you described it is kind of like understanding, influencing, and driving customer demand sort of product in a sense for e-commerce.
Yes, for customer service. So it's ultimately personalized experience on your e-commerce site, right? Understanding
Gotcha.
who's there and why, and working with the merchandisers, working with the marketing teams, delivering them either whatever agenda what the retailer is trying to push or the best customer service a user can have based on their prior interactions or based on their current demands, current needs.
Understood. And then from there, I saw Qubit exited the market, right?
Yes,
Got acquired, and then from there you went on and founded or co-founded Cerbos in
correct.
2020,
2021, March 2021,
2021.
in the middle of COVID, which kind of led us to be fully remote and asynchronous because we had
Okay.
no other choice. We couldn't have an office at the time.
Yeah. And I want to key in on something you were sort of talking about with sort of the developer experience, if you will. But I guess the point being, like, you can go out and have a team build a thing, build all
Okay.
these different things, or you can like strategically make the decision to buy certain products for developers so they can
Mhm.
focus more on building the differentiated product features, that drive the
Yes.
value that make the organization money. Is that sort of correct? And as it pertains to Cerbos?
Exactly. I mean, we see Cerbos as part of the software infrastructure that you need to have in place in order to be able to write your first line of code that actually differentiates your product, that actually makes your product your product. So, authentication doesn't make your product any different how you have people log in unless you invent a whole new novel way of authenticating. Your database, potential, unless you're into very high volume trading or very specialized AI or data retrieval. Database is a database. Messaging frameworks, payment processing. These are all necessities that you need to have in place to get things done. But the software we're all building, or software you're building, or any SaaS application is building, is about solving a business problem. And part of that is that's mainly the business logic of how do you handle that business problem, and everything else is just an auxiliary thing to enable those things.
Understood. And so, kind of not to get too off topic, I guess, but some really awesome projects out there are open source, obviously. And I think Cerbos is licensed under Apache 2.0. Um,
Yes.
but I guess open source at its core is open source, but then building a business on top of it, and having sort of a paid service, atop the open source, that makes things even easier. Um, why is this such a successful strategy in your opinion?
Um, it's I believe it's part of the PLG strategy, right? For product-led growth. And what is really product-led growth is product-led growth is enabling people to be able to use a product or a free version of the product to just get a sense of what it actually achieves, what it actually can help with. And once the user gets a sense of it and what it can do, then everything else becomes an upsell. And open source has many other benefits. Let's not just focus on the PLG thing. Open source gives, number one, a sense of two different senses of security to people who are adopting it. First sense of security it gives is this product is yours to own. If the company behind it goes away, if you find any bugs that nobody else is fixing it, you're kind of in control of being able to fix that. And then the second part is a little bit more specific to Cerbos' case, where security is paramount. And nowadays, and Cerbos is part of your security infrastructure. And by architecture, Cerbos is probably running at the heart of your network, way past all the fireworks, way past all the validation things. And you want to make sure whatever binary or black box you're running in there is not actually a black box, and it's not doing anything that it shouldn't be doing. So open source also gives people an ability to be able to inspect that and have a peace of mind. Um,
Awesome.
so that drives the open source portion of the business. And then usually businesses have built additional features on top of this. So when you cross the chasm from a developer need or from a simple company need into enterprise need, there are a bunch of other use cases start coming into it. It's like all the corporate requirements start coming into play. And many businesses who build on commercial open source solutions usually tend to build all of those features as a premium solution, and many organizations are happy to pay for it because it actually solves their corporate or enterprise complexity.
Awesome. Yeah, great. So that's an awesome sort of response. And that brings me to do you I guess, I mean, you probably hear tons of feedback from,
Mm,
technologists that have adopted Cerbos, and that
yes.
I know that at least when, the startup I work for, like whenever I hear good feedback, it like motivates me. It like fills that gas tank up and I'm just like plowing ahead with new ideas and new things. But do you ever hear anything in particular from your customer base, as far as like positive feedback that motivates you and helps encourage and, adapt and mature the product?
Um, so there are two camps of feedback. One of them is very positive, and it's great to hear, very motivational. Unfortunately, it doesn't help us much with further product development. And that feedback is, hey, we don't have to look at it anymore. We don't have to touch it. It just works. Great. We can actually focus somewhere else. I mean, it is the best thing to hear when people give, like nothing to say. It works. It does whatever it's supposed to do. It scales up. It's like, it does everything that's on the tin. And thank you. So that's obviously a very good, as you put it, the fills the gas tank up and gives us motivation to keep doing. And we only wish more people can actually hear that. But I guess the downside of that feedback is it's it's not it's not, what's the word, explicit in terms of how it does it and what it does. And then we also hear a lot of specific feedback on how it actually helped businesses save time, how they have actually, whether they've tried to do something like Cerbos in their prior businesses or in the current one, and how long it took them, and how Cerbos is freeing up that time so the developers can actually focus on other things. Recently we published a case study with a bank where they had their own internal layer of authorization that they've replaced with Cerbos, and Cerbos runs so efficiently compared to that. They're saving about $250,000 per year in just computing costs. So these are all great pieces of feedback that we hear, and we're always looking to spread the word on.
Awesome. So, I mean, the way that one of the, I think, with the outcropping of newer startups, especially even the startup that I work for today, sort of gives you a single way for an area of technology, a single way to do that across maybe the clouds, across on premises, across all the important areas to the
Mm,
corporation that's buying the product. Um, and I would say that, like, while we do have like direct competitors like in the space, like I think our
mm,
biggest competitor at this point is like cloud native and the
mm.
idea that you can just build it yourself. Do you see sort of cloud native as a big competitor for Cerbos?
Um, Yes and no. So number one, let's just go back to Cerbos and its premise, right? Cerbos provides you an authorization service, and in order to run the authorization service as fast and as efficient as possible, it needs to run as close to your code as possible with zero network time. Because our true competitor is a developer writing a library or a function to actually do these checks. So we try to make Cerbos as competitive as possible to that in terms of processing times, in terms of simplicity, and its SDKs. But we also reckon, so at the end of the day, Cerbos is a developer tool, and developers choose where their software is going to run. Right. So and as a developer tool, we need to be omnipresent no matter where their code is. So we've actually architected Cerbos in a way that it can run in a binary, as a binary in a on a bare metal machine, as a library, as a Kubernetes service. As a binary Kubernetes service, as a sidecar on Kubernetes. We made Cerbos. Cerbos' architecture has some opinionated, design, where Cerbos is actually stateless. So we actually have a lot of customers running Cerbos on AWS Lambdas, where they can actually spin up an instance in and out. So in our vocabulary, cloud native is number one, being able to deploy in any of these environments, no matter where they run, whether they run on a cloud provider or whether it's running on an on-premise. But the version of Cerbos that's not cloud native, it's not cloud as software as a service, right? It's not running as a service in cloud where you can actually access that from anywhere in the world where Cerbos is running. And that is by design, because authorization, unlike authentication, needs to be super fast. When you're authenticating with a piece of software, when you are logging in, whether logging in takes 100 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds, nobody really notices, that thing spinning a couple of more times, because once you're logged in, that token is cached. And once that token is cached, you can validate it anywhere, and your identity is never changing, right? You are who you are. And very rarely your roles might be changing if somebody's updating in real time. However, with authorization, every request is pretty much unique. There's a very high cardinality, and there's almost zero room for caching things. Right. So we wanted to make sure that because every request is unique, Cerbos doesn't hold any cache, and Cerbos needs to be actually giving you an answer immediately. Every API call you have, every interaction with your product, every click, every data rendering, anything needs to go through this authorization layer. And that needs to be super fast. If the authorization layer is for each one of these checks taking 50 milliseconds, suddenly your entire rendering, your end customer experience is impacted. It's almost akin to your every database query adding in 10 milliseconds to every database query. So that's why we do not run Cerbos in the cloud, which is a slight, I wouldn't call it a problem, but it's a slight obstacle for very early stage startups who are not used to running any infrastructure, and they need actually a service running in the cloud. But what we find is usually those tend to be hobbyist projects. The moment anything like that starts getting serious, there's actually a infrastructure that comes into play, and Cerbos can actually run in those environments. The other thing we call cloud native, from a cloud native perspective, Cerbos was born on the cloud native age. So what does that mean? We actually integrated in all the tooling that comes with cloud native, whether it's tracing, whether it's telemetry, all of those fine tools and technologies are part of Cerbos from day zero.
Gotcha. Okay. So by the time this episode launches, I guess you will have made Cerbos Hub like generally available
Correct.
from beta. So first of all, congratulations. That's great.
Thank you.
And so do you want to talk a little bit about that? Like, first of all, what is Cerbos Hub versus the open source core component for Cerbos?
Yes. So if we are going with industry terms, Cerbos open source is Cerbos PDP, is a policy decision point. This is the module you access with the information. Can this user do this action to this resource, or can the subject do this action to this resource? And it tells you allow or deny. Cerbos PDP is what interprets the policies, what consumes the policies and interprets the incoming requests and gives you a decision. And that's our open source product that's generally available. We are on, I believe, 37, 38 iteration of releasing that, and it's pretty stable. And that works great for developers who are willing to take that and implement it and manage it themselves. So they can actually, we give all the usual tooling for that. We give a playground online IDE where you can write policies into it. You can write policies and test them, simulate different scenarios. We give a unit testing framework that you can actually use to validate your policies before updating them, so that you don't end up shooting yourself in the foot with an incorrect update. And that's available to developers. Take it. Apache 2, freely available. Go. What we have, once we release Cerbos PDP open source, one of the things that we've seen is, what are the additional things that large enterprises or larger companies need when they're using Cerbos. And we actually identified a couple of pain points that every company was going through, and that's what built Cerbos Hub. And Cerbos Hub is what it is. It's an policy administration point. It's not a cloud hosted of Cerbos. It's a control plane for all your Cerbos instances. So now, rather than running each one of your Cerbos instances yourself and implementing a pull model of policies into them, we now have a central hub where we can enable developers to be able to compose their policies, test them, and build them collaboratively, Google Docs style. So it comes with an online IDE that is that does all of your corrections. Every time you type, runs all of your unit tests in the background, lets you know if you're stepping in the wrong direction right away. So you don't have to build, deploy, test, and then have a much longer cycle. It connects to all of your instances. It has, it monitors them. It has statuses of each one of them. It in real time streams all of your new policies to the instances all at the same time. So one of the problems with the open source, where because it's a pull model and you can actually define, let's say, 10 seconds or 1 minute as a refresh interval for a policy update, each one of those are open source ones are capable of checking for updates and updating themselves, hot updating themselves. But if your refresh interval is 1 minute, and if you're running more than one instance, now you have about a minute of discrepancy potential among all your instances. So Cerbos Hub turns that into a push model. When every instance is connected, it can take your policies, run CI on them, make sure they actually compile and pass all the tests, and when they do, in real time, synchronize all of your instances at the same time. And additionally, it does two more things. One is it builds a WebAssembly version of your policy. So now you can actually deploy Cerbos PDPs, what we call them as an embedded PDPs, in environments where you cannot run a binary, i.e. a web browser, i.e. Vercel, Netlify kind of environments, where you can make the checks, again, using the same SDK, but you don't have to do a full round trip to a binary that's running somewhere. And the other feature is actually, as we are releasing Cerbos into GA, we're now also releasing Cerbos logs into beta, and Cerbos logs are collecting all of the log data from all your instances and be able to actually expose them to security teams. Because Cerbos is behind every decision, it means Cerbos logs actually contain information about who tried to do when, whether they were allowed or not, and why, which policy actually enabled them to do, which is a very valuable piece of information for security teams. And now imagine all of your stack, whether it's backend, frontend, mobile application, batch processing, actually has these logs in a uniformed way, and now you can actually access them. So with Cerbos Hub release going to GA, we're actually also releasing Cerbos logs into beta.
That's great. And I know that, of course, this is targeted towards making developer experience like so much better, because this is just a hard, it's a challenging problem to solve. But it almost sounds like it's the second persona would be that of, your security engineer. That's really like when you have to go back and you have to figure out what happened. It takes so long in certain circumstances because it's just a pain to know exactly what you just said. Who did what, when they did it, with what account, like all these different things. So having a consistent way of, garnering that information and doing something with it, that's huge. That's a big win right there.
Yes, absolutely. And there are two parts of that story. One is writing the new requirements and distributing them. So that again makes security engineers' life easier. So now your roles, the role definitions and the actions that map to roles can be deployed independent of the application. And then the backside of that story is who did what, whether they were allowed or not. And there are actually many other use cases after we release logs into beta that we're working on to make the security use cases better, which make policy composition and security implementation easier and faster.
Awesome. Well, yeah, best of luck with the launch. Yeah, and just it's amazing. You launched this during COVID, which is a huge, seeing where you are now. and knowing what the climate was like during COVID, obviously for startups, it wasn't easy for anybody, obviously. But yeah, good luck with the launch. Looking forward to it. And yeah, where can folks find you on the internet if they want to connect?
So I am on Twitter. I still call it Twitter, not X yet, but although I believe the domain name already switched over to X.com. My Twitter handle is Emre, and on LinkedIn I'm Emre Baran. I'm sure listeners can find these in the show notes. And Cerbos is cerbos.dev.
Awesome. And I love the website, by the way. So there's many bad websites out there, and the Cerbos website's very well. It's clean, the colors, just finding things. It's very apparent exactly what you need to know and not much more. And so yeah, kudos on a good website.
Thank you very much. We still think there's a lot more we can improve, but it's been always designed with developers in mind first, because they are the ones who actually take this product and implement. Without developers, I don't think we'd be anywhere. And us coming from a development background, our mission number one is to make life easier for them, and in turn, they can make life easier for the rest of the people in their organizations.